everyone. I'm Jay Wang, Director of the USC Center on Public Diplomacy. Welcome to our CPD Conversation series, and thank you for joining us online. Just one housekeeping item for those of you who have questions during the program, please feel free to submit those questions using the question function. For any public diplomacy organizations these days, understanding how your audience might interact with you, their communication expectations and preferences is a critical first step in navigating the contemporary information landscape. Meeting your audience where they are is central to effective communication, and the data sources form a crucial foundation for content creation, for building relationships, and for managing these relationships. Today's event takes a look at how to find meaningful metrics across the communications ecosystem for developing data-driven strategy. It is part of our ongoing effort at CPD to underscore the need for innovation in the study and practice of public diplomacy through, for example, integrating the use of data and technology for creative solutions for the challenges that we face. We have a terrific speaker today with us on this timely and important topic, Jason Wulfsohn, who is CEO and co-founder of AUDIENCEX. He will discuss the latest approaches to reaching audiences using enterprise technology platforms and to explore the many implications for the field of public diplomacy. With over 20 years of experience as tech innovator and entrepreneur, Jason has launched and scaled multiple businesses across content, media, and advertising technology. AUDIENCEX, which he co-founded, is today a leading advertising technology and marketing company, consistently ranked by the business press as one of the fastest growing private businesses in the US. Jason earned a BA and MA in English literature from Cambridge University, and then went on to complete an MFA at USC Film School. So Jason, welcome back to USC, and I would like to invite you to give opening remarks, and we look forward to hearing from you and the discussion with you and your colleague. And also, by the way, we also have Jason's colleague, Danny Gale, with us today. So both of us will share their experiences and perspectives in this space. And so over to you, Jason.
Thank you so much, Jay. I'm grateful for the generous introduction. And I will reinforce the fact that I'm an alumnus of the school, so it's a pleasure to return in this capacity. And I'll also mention that I feel like a little bit of an imposter today because, I work extensively, as Jay explained, in the world of digital media, brand and performance marketing. And what Jay's asked myself and Danny, my colleague, to talk about today are some of the connective points between the worlds that we inhabit and the worlds that you guys inhabit. So specifically, I've been running AUDIENCEX, as Jay mentioned. We're a leading US-based ad tech company. We've been around for the last 10 years. We do work with many of the largest brands in the world, both in the US and internationally. And I know there's an international audience participating in this session today. Beyond the brand work that we do, we work pretty extensively with impact organizations, political campaigns, advocacy groups, et cetera. So we do feel like we have a meaningful point of view that we can share. Discussions that I've had with Jay over the last year or so have been around the things that we face in our world and an exploration of how they may have relevance for the world that you guys inhabit. There's obviously a lot of connection points, as I said, between both worlds. But there's no question in my mind, and I think Danny would agree, that brand marketers are deploying at very significant scale powerful technology and ad tech tools, mostly around data targeting and AI, that those in the public sector are perhaps not activating. And we do see that repeatedly when we engage with governmental agencies, political communications teams, et cetera. Now, the reasons for this, I would suggest, are very self-evident to everybody that's participating in this discussion. Cost, technical proficiency, certainly privacy concerns, and perhaps even outdated or maybe anachronistic strategic thinking. as it pertains to digital communication. So Jay's asked myself and Danny to spend a little bit of time today talking about how our company helps brands drive visibility, awareness, engagement, and ultimately conversion, or measurable conversion, should I say. And using that discussion as a kind of jumping off point to explore how some of these ideas, strategic and tactical, can have real relevance for those of you, and I think it's all of you, who are working in the field of public diplomacy. So I'll quickly mention what we want to cover today over the next 60 minutes or so. I'm going to very briefly talk about the role of media and communications in public diplomacy up until the start of the 21st century, in particular, right up until the 2008 Obama campaign, which is often, as you guys know, considered the kind of start of the digital age in political and public communications. There have been a series of really interesting inflection points since then, familiar to everybody on this discussion. WikiLeaks in 2010, Arab Spring in 2011, and then I would say Cambridge Analytica, Leave.eu, the Ted Cruz campaign, and obviously the first Trump presidential campaign in 2016. We're also going to talk a little bit about data privacy, in particular some recent legislation that you're familiar with, largely a response to the Facebook hack, et cetera, which has fundamentally changed the work that we do, and in turn will, and in terms of this discussion, alter how you guys can and should indeed think about digital communications. It's our belief that these shifts from a legislative standpoint represent a lot of opportunity, and we're going to talk about how you can activate those opportunities. I'm going to focus my discussion on our own solution at AUDIENCEX, how we deploy enterprise tech, as Jay said, to deliver transformational outcomes for marketers, and try to find ways in which that can be relevant for your work. From the standpoint of strategic setup, measurable KPIs, media planning, conversion journey tracking, et cetera. And finally, I'm going to propose some best practices that may have relevance, I hope, for the work that you guys are doing to improve outcomes with respect to deploying some of these ideas. Following that, as Jay said, we'll have a Q&A and a discussion. So let me briefly talk about what diplomacy looked like from the standpoint of communications before the end of the 21st, or should I say the 20th century. So this was a period characterized by one-to-one interaction or engagement, politician to politician, what was sometimes called great man to great man, diplomacy 1.0, if you will, the embassy playing a very outsized role, opportunities to expand outreach to localized populations was inevitably constrained. This implementation or activation of soft power was not achieved through the things that we do at scale, grassroots, mass mobilization, broad delivery of messaging, but through traditional foreign policy engagement, linear channels, broadcast media, et cetera. The birth of digital diplomacy or e-diplomacy, I noticed it was actually suggested as far back as the Johnson presidency in '67, but this Web 2.0 ICT kind of era that we're in right now was a complete transformational shift. It represents, and still does, this interactive version of the internet. So an opportunity to build a much more multidimensional relationship, citizen to citizen, person to person. So moving beyond public diplomacy, which of course is the art of, I guess, communicating a country's policies, values, and culture to another nation, into an activation of Web 2.0, this new interactivity, this internet phenomenon, to achieve a drastically different kind of communication dynamic, citizen to citizen. And we saw this shift really accelerate with the Obama campaign in '08. As you guys may recall, Ad Age named the Obama campaign the Ad Age Marketer of the Year, which is the first time any political campaign has achieved this recognition. WikiLeaks in 2010, obviously the largest ever release of confidential documents into the public domain, but it became instantly symptomatic of the power of an individual to communicate across this vast networked ecosystem. The Arab Spring in 2011, also revealing that governments can no longer control the flow of information, and it's really a place for information, or a moment where we saw information live within these social environments. And finally, Cambridge Analytica and SLC, I think was a really transformational moment that leads up to the discussion we want to focus on, which is what do we do and how do we do it, and how does that have relevance for you? You guys know Michael Kosinski, obviously the researcher at Stanford who built this really disruptive and pretty rudimentary algorithm based on public Facebook likes that provided very accurate predictive analytics about someone's future behavior, specifically with respect to their political views, political choices, and political actions. And this led to the capacity of Cambridge Analytica to deliver really extraordinary, and I would say, overperforming outcomes for Ted Cruz and then obviously Trump in 2016. Brittany Kaiser, who was head of business development at Cambridge Analytica, pointed out that by 2018, data had surpassed oil as the most valuable asset in the world. And companies as a result like Google, Amazon, Meta today, Apple, et cetera, in turn had therefore become the most valuable companies in the world. So digital psychographics, that's the world we're in. That's what Cambridge Analytica unlocked. And it reveals the extraordinary power of these technologies to drive successful communication outcomes. Now, even after the collapse of Cambridge Analytica, all the principals are still very active doing the same things. Alexander Nix, the Mercer family, et cetera, because the reality is that today, and this is where I'm shifting now to the work that we do at AUDIENCEX, brand and performance marketers can very accurately determine everything that a consumer thinks, feels, and ultimately wants. And we do this by leveraging vast amounts of real-time data, applying predictive analytics, and making determinations about future behavior, likelihood to engage, convert, take action, et cetera. You'll often hear people say, we do all the time, my computer or my mobile phone is listening to everything I say, and digital messaging seems so targeted to me. The reality is actually much simpler and in fact more pervasive. We at AUDIENCEX and other digital marketers have the ability to monitor all digital behavior through tracking pixels, credit card swipes, et cetera, social media engagement, geolocators, online purchases, et cetera, to successfully anticipate future behavior of a consumer or a user or a participant in the national discourse. Let me briefly talk about what's happening in the regulatory environment, and then we'll shift gears to what we're doing at AUDIENCEX. So there's a very powerful regulatory shift to rein in the power of big tech, these gatekeeper companies. Part of this is driven by a recognition that these companies will not engage in self-regulation on their own. Part of it, I believe, and others do as well, driven by a desire of these companies to restore the public's faith or trust, if you will, in the internet, or really the open internet. And before the end of today, I hope we'll get a chance to talk about Web3. Danny knows a lot about this because this is an entirely new ecosystem. It's totally decentralized. It's totally non-regulated. It's not controlled by a handful of these digital gatekeeper companies. So it actually has the opportunity, the potential to remake everything that we're talking about in a really positive way and in a way that's deeply relevant to the worlds of public diplomacy. Right now, we're still emerging, I would say, from Web 2.0, and governments all over the world are figuring out how to address these heavily regulated environments. We've seen GDPR, CCPA here in California, obviously. It's happening throughout the United States. There's DSA and DMA in the UK, obviously, that seeks to impose even more stringent regulatory provisions on online platforms. And obviously, we saw in 2021 the decision by Google to phase out the third-party tracking cookie for Chrome. It hasn't happened yet. It may never happen. But I think we know with certainty that the third-party tracking cookie is ultimately going away. And so one of the things I want to talk about, and Danny wants to talk about, is how can people in this environment activate communication successfully without being able to leverage the full breadth of solutions available to us today with respect to third-party cookie tracking. It may be that this cookie deprecation will be deferred indefinitely through anxiety, principally from Google around antitrust issues. But we know that the third-party data environment is shifting fundamentally. There's a few key things that we'll reference, from how to use your first-party data more successfully, how to use second-party data more successfully through partnerships, how to think about contextual targeting and advertising to drive successful communications in a post-cookie ecosystem, and really move toward a new term, which is zero-party data, which is really the goal, and I think specifically relevant here. So let me shift gears and now talk to you guys, along with Danny, my colleague, about the work at AUDIENCEX and take you through some slides that hopefully will give you visibility into the work that we do and how it may have relevance to you guys. Let's shift gears to the deck, please. Okay, fantastic. So just a little bit of setup on AUDIENCEX. I think it's relevant context. We really have been around as pioneers in programmatic omni-channel performance marketing since 2014, and in fact, since 2012. As Jay generously pointed out, we're one of the fastest growing players in the space with offices throughout the United States. I'll give you a glimpse into some of the brands that we work with. Obviously, this is fundamentally outside of the world of public diplomacy, but it's our goal today to talk about how some of these brands are leveraging enterprise tech and how it may have relevance for you guys. So let me start here, because I think this is really the most meaningful place to start. And I'll invite Danny to chime in as and when she feels it makes sense. But the traditional customer life cycle, which is not dissimilar to any engagement journey for anybody interacting with an entity, whether it's a brand or a governmental agency. It historically has been a linear journey, moving from awareness toward conversion. And it's been very easy to think about how to influence and impact that user through a linear journey. Today, in this Web 2.0, moving toward Web 3 environment, that customer lifecycle has become nonlinear, multidimensional, fragmented, and very specific to an individualized user. And any discussion about how to leverage communication successfully today must begin here, because unless you can recognize and map and make sense of this nonlinear journey, it's going to be very difficult to deliver communication successfully.
Yes, I would also just like to add, thinking about yourself as a customer, think about your own journey and how you've shifted over the years. Before you interact with a brand, you might be, checking out their Instagram, their social pages. How many followers do they have? How many comments do they have before making a purchase even? Right now, what we see is a lot of customers and people are becoming way more information seeking and information obsessed before they even interact with a brand or even a government body. So it's really important to kind of look at the user journey over time and making sure across each user journey that you have some point of digital interaction with these users as they become more information obsessed, really before interacting with you as a brand. These are what consumers are doing. Really important.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. So we like to say that at AUDIENCEX, it's our goal to imbue with measurable value every point of interaction throughout the entirety of the digital landscape. And of course, today, the digital landscape traverses in very substantive ways into what used to be known as the nonlinear or the offline world. So channels like, linear broadcast, radio, even out of home, have now been replaced with fully addressable technologies that have blurred the division between what used to be known as online and offline. So really digital today reaches into every interaction point that a consumer and or somebody in the public diplomacy space is engaging with a piece of communications content. I'll shift now to talk a little bit about a term Danny and I use frequently, which is omnichannel. This is a trajectory we've been on for a while, but it's been fundamentally accelerated by the pandemic. And today, as we emerge from this pandemic, we inhabit, and Danny referenced this, a fully omni-channel world. We all know this from our own digital behavior. The average American household has in excess of 16 connected devices, and it's over 14.8 billion connected devices globally today. And that's an increase of 18% just in this past year. So think deeply, for those of you, as I think it's everybody in this communication space, what does omnichannel really mean? And how, therefore, should it shape the ways in which we seek to deliver effective communications? Consumers engage, Danny just suggested this, at every moment through an array of different digital tools, and they're constantly traversing between channels and devices. both online and offline, which is now, as I said, fused into this kind of seamless communications landscape. We must recognize omnichannel behavior if we seek to deliver effective communications. 98% of Americans switch between devices in the same day. Companies that deploy omnichannel successfully achieve far more successful growth, and 64% of customers expect to receive real-time assistance from the brands that they engage with. So real-time activation of communications, I think, is really powerful and meaningful, irrespective of what the communications goal is.
I would only add that if you look at the US alone, Americans on average have 10 connected devices. This is, between a smartphone, personal work phone, a laptop, PC, a few smart TVs in their home. They also have a lot of connected devices through smart speakers. So for brands and for public diplomacy, this presents a unique challenge on how you reach out to your consumers when they're constantly switching between devices throughout their day, and they're becoming so much more digitally connected. So by pursuing omni-channel, you're thinking of the consumer first, putting them in the middle in regards to all of their devices and how they intergage and interact with each, and how you reach out to them in those moments when they're, viewing a CTV ad on their smart TV versus when they're reaching out to Alexa to turn on the lights. Each moment is a unique chance for companies and brands to reach out to their prospective customers.
So, this deck obviously views digital communications through the lens of the needs of performance marketers, but it's our thesis today at Jay's invitation that this has deep relevance to the work of those in public diplomacy, and I would argue that fundamentally that's correct. So what are the benefits of omnichannel, and why must brands or those in the communication space embrace omnichannel if they seek to be effective? As I suggested, it's the expectation of the consumer, and to ignore that expectation is to diminish the power of the communications campaign to drive measurable and sustainably scalable results. So the benefits of omnichannel marketing, we suggest that there's 5: high customer retention and loyalty, a smoother customer journey, an increase in revenue, which could also mean an increase in engagement and activation, whether it's an election, whether it's building advocacy or engagement around a public initiative, more integrated business. So deploying data in an integrated way throughout the entirety of an operational ecosystem. And very interestingly, I think, and perhaps most interestingly for this conversation, what is the capacity of omnichannel to deliver really robust, meaningful, and powerful real-time data-informed insights and analytics that can help shape tactical activation, help shape communications choices, maybe even shift policy. And we often say that, historically, it's been our goal to deliver revenue outcomes, but really data has become the currency of performance marketing. Can data represent an equivalent value, or I would suggest even a greater value than the revenue outcome of a campaign? I think that's very relevant to this conversation.
Yeah, I would just add to what we see today with even our own brands or even companies that adopt this omni-channel pursuit. We actually see the customer becoming onboarded with the brand a lot quicker had they taken a multi-channel approach. So really, this is very beneficial if you're a government body, you want to create change and institute behaviors from your different audiences. It happens much quicker when you adopt an omni-channel solution. So really important.
Right. So let's spend a moment and really talk about what does omnichannel activation actually mean. It's no longer about deployment within a single channel environment. And what does tactical execution look like within omnichannel, within that single channel? It's rather about recognizing that performance traverses all channels and all engagement points in a single integrated and holistic moment. It's not about one part of the conversion journey. It's not about one area of channel activation. It's about a seamless and difficult to execute synthesis across all facets of digital engagement. We seek to deliver meaningful metrics that can drive more powerful, in our case, media optimizations, in your case, potentially deeper insights, at every moment of digital engagement and every moment of digital interaction to deliver this unified omnichannel performance strategy. At the bottom, you can see just some suggestions of the ways in which we traverse different engagement points in our digital journey, both online and offline, from the home, whether it's desktop to mobile, into retail and back again. It's spirals of engagement that produce a complete omnichannel activation. So this is a really fascinating slide, Danny. I don't know if you want to speak to this. We talk about holistic access to every channel and engagement point, seeking to find on behalf of performance marketers, customers at every stage of their own unique, and as I suggested, nonlinear fragmented kind of digital journey. On the left, you see a consumer in market for a personal loan. On the right, you see a consumer in market for a piece of luggage. What are the different points during their journey that we can interact and engage to move them toward eventual conversion? Without recognizing this, it's very difficult for the performance marketer or for any marketer to successfully move the consumer through this journey toward eventual conversion. On the left, exposure to a CTV ad, being retargeted on desktop with a display ad, visiting a financial site, signing up for an email newsletter, hearing a programmatic audio ad, and eventually returning to the conversion point, the own digital destination, and finally converting. The consumer on the right, does it begin with the Google search, a price comparison and browsing, retargeting again on desktop, downloading of a coupon on mobile, returning back to the site, but closing browser, receiving some piece of remarketing communication via email, and finally returning to the site to convert. We all know this inherently from our own digital behaviors, but a lot of marketers are only now beginning to embrace this as an ethos and approach. And when they do, we at AUDIENCEX see transformational outcomes for the performance marketer.
Yeah, I would say too, these user journeys are overly complex too, because they're backed by technology. And at each step of the way, a marketer, the smart ones, they actually have an opportunity to make little kind of, acknowledgements of, okay, this user did a search, and then next I showed him an ad on desktop, and then next he did this action. So the marketer, with the power of data, has the opportunity to kind of keep track of these interactions and see which one, the left or the right, is a better, smoother customer journey for their own campaigns. But without that data, it's very hard to keep track and make sense of the user journey. Also, as users interchange between desktop and mobile device, it requires different technologies that don't speak to each other. So although this looks very, very simple and kind of intuitive, even in your own personal journey, this is actually very complex when you're in the lens of the marketer and trying to figure out the different avenues and where do I need to invest my marketing budget to have the most positive outcome. And so later when we talk about data, this is going to be a pivotal point to think about, knowing what data you have access to and how you make sure each journey is the right one for your customer and how you invest in the right solutions to reach them.
I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but this begins to suggest the ways in which we as an organization, and potentially the organizations that you guys work with, can start to deploy successful omnichannel campaigns to deliver measurable transformational outcomes. And for us, it's the construction of our own tech stack, which really is an integrated omnichannel full funnel platform solution that enables the marketer to effortlessly traverse different channels, acquire data along the way, and use that to deliver better performance outcomes through real-time optimizations. We've talked a lot about strategy and optimization. We've talked about cross-channel insights. We've talked about, I think, the different digital channels, both online and offline today. Unified in reporting, though, I'll just pause and reflect here for a moment to say that this is going to be something that will enable those beginning to activate these solutions to deeply understand impact in real time and to evangelize the power of these kinds of solutions to your own organizations. The amount of data or analytics and insights that we can extract from these campaigns It's an immense amount of robust, powerful, really meaningful data insights that you can use to reveal impact of these campaigns against the different goals that you've defined for yourselves from a communication standpoint. When we work in the political landscape, for example, as we are right now in the run-up to the midterms, there's a whole array of different campaigns, KPIs that campaigns care about, with the eventual campaign obviously being the choice that you make at the ballot box. But we're able to connect investment in media to measurable KPIs that are valuable to the campaign, to really give everybody full visibility into the power of these solutions to drive measurable outcomes that are going to ultimately deliver, in the case of political communications, the desired outcome that we want from the voter. This is a very interesting slide that I think really powerfully visualizes this nonlinear conversion journey that we're talking about. Danny, I don't know if you want to reflect here on how we think about this structure and what it means to better performance outcomes.
Yeah, of course. This kind of, cyclical kind of graph kind of just illustrates the different touch points that a user kind of takes throughout their day before they come to hear or know about, be informed about a policy or a government, to actually becoming loyal and kind of affiliated with that policy or government. So there's a lot of different steps. Users, consumers will go through an awareness journey. They might see an email, they might see a video ad on YouTube, or they might even walk past and see a digital out-of-home screen. But as they go through the journey, the brand is then trying to reach and engage back with them again on social media. They might want to drive this user to a particular landing page where they could read more information. They might need to revisit them back on mobile to make a purchase. And then they want that user to come back. So they'll email them again. They'll share another display ad. I don't know if you guys feel anytime in your own journey of brands stalking you. This is kind of the journey it does take, though, to come from like a user to just hear about a policy or a brand, to then become, someone to first engage and interact, and then to become an advocate for your brand. So it's really important that you think of social media even at the upper stage of awareness, all the way down to becoming a loyal, engaged persona. So it's really important to not only just think very linearly, but kind of use this kind of funnel, and especially informed by data and guided by strategy, to really help drive the best outcomes.
So I know this is a slide that Jay likes, and I have a even more interesting slide. And I think Jay probably likes it because it's frankly surprising when you begin to unpack the complexity that actually exists within the ad tech landscape today. And this is vastly less complex than the next slide I'm going to show you, but this is essentially what our tech stack looks like. We provide access to the full breadth of performance platforms that drive outcomes for consumers today, including demand-side platforms, which we can talk about momentarily, search, social, and direct engagement. The data partners that we use, mostly third-party data partners, to really deliver very powerful targeting to clearly define audience segments, and then brand safety and contextual targeting, which is a crucially important piece in today's kind of performance campaigns. I'm going to pause and see what Danny would like to contribute, because she spends a lot of time thinking about these partnerships and looking at ways in which we can activate them. And then I'm going to show you what the full breadth of the landscape looks like, which I think is a pretty kind of remarkable snapshot.
Yeah, so this is very complicated. It is pure technology that you need to power digital advertising. So you've been thinking yourself, you see an ad on Facebook, a lot goes into getting that ad in front of your eyes, even on channels like Facebook, having that married between Snapchat, even things like Reddit, and then what you see online while you're browsing kind of news sites. All of these technology platforms are different in their walled gardens. It also requires technical expertise to know how these platforms interact, what levers you could use within the platforms to get to your desired outcome. Kind of getting access to these platforms is kind of phase one in any kind of brand or any kind of advertiser journey. The next step, what kind of Jason alluded to, is Web 2.0, is making these platforms do what you want them to do. It's one thing to get a campaign launched on Facebook, but it's another thing to empower Facebook to reach out to the right customers and speak to the people you want to speak to. So that's where we layer in data partners and things like brand safety and contextual targeting, which we could talk about later. But there's a lot that goes into just setting up digital, but it is all empowered by technology. So my biggest advice to anyone listening, if you are pursuing this in a career, I would definitely look at getting certified on some of these platforms and learning the language too, between Facebook, between Google, between Pinterest, because that's going to give you an advantage to working with companies, helping advise on public diplomacy. Having that technical expertise is going to be really beneficial.
So this is the slide that I wanted to share. This is actually real. It's published annually. This is 2022. And this is looking at the whole marketing landscape. And contained within each of these boxes are specific vendors that are focused on individualized parts of the customer journey. This is actually real. And as I said, it shifts and changes annually. This is the most recent one. It's not the one that's most relevant to us. The one that is most relevant to us is, in fact, yet another highly complex, but accurate visual representation of what, in this case, the programmatic display landscape looks like. And, you know, perhaps there's an opportunity for Jay and or others within this program to share this with you, but it's worth spending a little bit of time really trying to understand the flow of the structural flow that's being described diagrammatically here. Agencies exist all the way on the left. An agency trading desk, which is to the right of an agency, is what AUDIENCEX is. An agency trading desk activates DSPs, which are really powerful, algorithmic powered, programmatic solutions that utilize real-time bidding technologies, not dissimilar to what you might see in the stock market today, to access available digital inventory that is being unsold by publishers via what are known as exchanges. And I'm now moving from left to right. Exchanges will be familiar to you if you know anything at all about this landscape, but it was that shift from direct purchase of media to programmatic and ultimately addressable real-time bidding activations that transformed, you know, what we had referred to as Web 1.0 to Web 2.0 and has deep relevance to the power of marketers today to reach people successfully and convert. Ad networks are to the right of exchanges. And then we talked a little bit about very much on the consumer facing side, social tools and social platforms. And there's an immense amount of complexity that lives beneath this, you know, whether it's through attribution, which is a really major question that we wrestle with, which is if an eventual conversion occurs, how do we find proportional ways to attribute the value of different platforms and different tactics against that eventual conversion point? The most simplistic attribution tool would be known as last click. But as we know, and we've tried to suggest this pretty emphatically today, the last action that you take has been influenced by a whole series of prior actions that have occurred. So we think in a much more holistic way around algorithmic, multi-touch attribution types of modeling to really understand how different digital engagement points have ultimately contributed to a final conversion. For everybody interested in delivering powerful communications outcomes, thinking about return on investment, it's essential to think in a really sophisticated way about that attribution piece, because that's the only way that you can justify investment in different channels and different tactics. So thinking cross-channel and thinking proportionally about impact of investment is really a crucial part of this. Danny, I know there's a lot on this slide. Anything you want to allude to before we move on?
I mean, it's overly complicated, but also a ton of opportunity. So again, if you're pursuing, you know, an education in communications, I think just looking at this landscape is exciting because of the immense opportunity, and especially too for public diplomacy. they especially have to be careful in this landscape because of the data collection and who they interact with. But it presents a very unique opportunity for them to find the right partners and companies to work with. But you could see it's massive and it's a huge scale. So it's a good career path.
Couple more slides and then we're going to shift gears. I know Jay has a conversation he'd like to embark upon with us. So I'll just take a couple more moments to wrap this up. And I'll just briefly pause on this slide. So this is a piece of technology we've built called TDX, which looks at the power of different platforms to deliver specific KPIs in very individualized ways that are unique to the performance capabilities of the technologies in question. These are the kinds of tools that those in communications can leverage themselves, either in partnership with a company like us or through activating these kind of tools internally. We talked a little bit about future-proofing our solution, and I'll let Jay speak to that. I know he had some questions he wanted to explore, but what is the role of these regulatory shifts with respect to the capacity of marketers to activate third-party data today? That's fundamentally changing, and it's something that needs to be reflected upon very deeply. And, you know, finally, this is what our solution looks like, and I think it's a meaningful summation of the things that we've talked about over the last 45 minutes or so. Along with this slide that really speaks to campaign construction and campaign activation and execution. I think this slide will be relevant to some of the questions that Jay wanted to address. So we're going to pause there and turn this over to Jay so that we can have as much opportunity as possible to discuss and reflect and potentially take questions as well.
Well, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Danny. Now I have a new favorite slide. I have a few questions, but actually we have a question from the audience. Gets to, I guess, the essential challenge in many ways in the public diplomacy field as we think about looking at technology and data. So the question is, how much should the Ministry of Foreign Affairs expect to spend on this kind of technology for public diplomacy purposes?
That's the million-dollar question. Yeah, that's very hard to answer. Right, there is no exact dollar amount to spend. I would say what we find the most effective brands are dedicating at least 25% of the overall media investment, marketing investment into data and technology solutions. So 25%, 1/4 of the overall marketing kind of budget goes into actual data partnerships, technology partnerships, et cetera, because they find it that important. I don't have an exact number, it depends, but definitely allocating at least upwards of 25% is what we tend to see.
Yeah, I can add to that if I may, Jay, and just layer on top of what Danny's shared, which is that we tend always, and it would be our suggestion in response to this question, to begin with the campaign goals and really deeply understand what a marketer is seeking to accomplish. Once we understand what success looks like, we can construct different budgetary parameters that lead toward a successful roadmap or eventual campaign outcome. We look at things like the competitive landscape. We look at things like audience segmentation or the size of addressable markets. We look at the cost of media needed to reach specific demographics, specific audience segments based upon a deep understanding that we have about ways in which different audiences are going to respond and engage with different kind of media choices. So it's very difficult. And in fact, we would never advise to start with a budgetary allocation, but rather we start with communications or campaign goal. And then we provide pathways to the marketer to reach that successfully. I will say that there is an asymmetrical value to successfully deploying powerful data-informed technology solutions. Long gone are the days where a scale of budget had a direct correlation to successful outcome. Today, there are ways to leverage data and leverage technology to produce improved outcomes through the tactical sophistication of the activation itself. And there isn't a linear correlation today between marketers spending more and producing better outcomes than those who spend less. We work with a very large number of challenger brands who have been able to level the playing field through a more sophisticated, more creative deployment of available technologies than large enterprise brands.
Well, on that point about, defining campaign goals or for public diplomacy, or earlier you were talking about what are the desired outcomes in terms of the KPIs. And I was trying to think, like, in public diplomacy, some of the desired outcome is not as specific and concrete as like the election results or a sales conversion. We talk about relationship building. I wonder if you could sort of discuss a little bit, like, what might be some of the meaningful metrics you have seen, even working with private sector companies, because they talk about relationship building as well, right? That are meaningful in terms of us to think about what might be the KPIs, and then will lead to, right, how much actually we need to invest in this type of work in terms of technology investment.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll start. I'm sure Danny will want to add some thoughts as well. Yes, in the case, for example, of a political communications campaign, the ultimate conversion metric that the campaign cares about is what happens privately inside the ballot box. And it's our task to define a series of digital engagement points that successfully anticipate future behavior. So some of the things that we look at very carefully, for example, are the ways in which users engage with content. How much time are they spending with that content? And what actions are they taking as a result of engaging with pieces of content? What sorts of behaviors are they taking inside a site environment? Are they signing up for an email? Are they sharing a piece of content? And how do we use, for example, things like search behavior to measure reaction or sentiment or attitude toward a specific idea? And how can we use that to construct a holistic and anticipatory or predictive model that gives us deep understanding of where to deploy media to move a consumer or a user toward a preferred or eventual outcome? Danny, what are your thoughts on that? It's a great question.
Very good question. I think too, a lot of policy, what they look for is, identifying their addressable audience, getting that size and kind of markup, and then reaching that audience. Do they reach 60% of that audience, or 70%, or 100%? And at what frequency? Do they speak to everyone at least once or twice, or actually 7 times? So you could actually build into your campaigns reach and frequency goals to make sure that you are actually speaking to the addressable market at a high frequency. And then, as what Jason said, you then look for things like, out of this population, how many came to the website? How many looked at an infographic? How many actually completed a 3-minute educational video instead of signing off in the first 6 seconds? So there's a lot of other health metrics you can look and have and institute in your campaigns. But definitely the first is sizing your audience and making sure you reach, as close to 100% as you can.
So this is almost like the first step, which is how do you actually map out the user journey? Earlier you were talking about, and I think also related to another question we have is how to do that, because in public diplomacy work, it's quite wide-ranging in a way that, so we have the policy advocacy, we have a lot of activities in cultural engagement. Having said that, I also think that we have several big categories of things, activities, and I have said that we need to compile user journey for like an exchange program. What is usually people kind of experience? What are the steps they go through, and what types of communication or media channels they sort of interact with? But just to compile that, what does it take to compile that? Just the first, like to figure out what is the user journey for anybody who gets into an exchange program with the embassy, for instance.
Yeah.
Danny, I'll let you take that.
Yeah, of course. It's definitely mapping out the different audiences for an exchange program, right? Because there's not just one, you're not just reaching to one audience. There's going to be subsectors, different backgrounds, cultural backgrounds from East versus Western countries, and kind of building kind of market insights and audience insights around these different personas. I'll give an example that's a bit different than an exchange program, but we've recently worked with a big state on a public health concern, and they really wanted to go out to market and really raise awareness about a pandemic happening within drug overdose, right? And so to reach kind of their audience, they needed to break it down on who's actually kind of hurting from this drug overdose. It's youth, but it's also adults. It's also a sub breakdown of those adults with diverse backgrounds, and diverse incomes. So again, every kind of subgroup of that audience requires a different customer journey, right? Because someone 16 to 18 is going to have a very different user journey than an adult who's 35 plus. So it's actually looking at your holistic audience and then breaking it down into at least about 4 or 5 different personas and building bespoke customer journeys for each. And that's how you're really going to drive effective kind of results. For example, getting an exchange program or a student on board. So it's understanding too the backgrounds, any religion makeup, how do you talk to that specific group versus another? What's going to impact them more? Are they going to actually, click on an ad that talks about, some sort of funding help, to make it a bit more affordable? Or is this user actually really concerned about the different programs and courses? So maybe we want to show them a completely different creative. So it's really kind of this overarching idea of personalization and kind of finding the sub audiences within your whole makeup and then building the customer journey based on what data that's telling you where they exist. So we work with like a lot of data programs too that will give us a sense of how 18 to 25-year-olds spend their time online versus 35 to 45-year-olds. So this data is really important because it kind of gives you the map of where they are and where they exist throughout the day.
And I assume that this user journey data is very dynamic because it may change, right? Just even the same segment or the same, group of individuals, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jane. It's something I wanted to amplify a little bit, which is that, campaign planning, which is one of the many things that Danny focuses on, like the customer journey today, isn't actually linear. So we do build out an overarching strategy with tactical activation within that. But as the campaigns launch, there's an immense amount of real-time insights and learnings that emerge during every moment that the campaign is deploying impressions. Algorithmically, we adjust and react. We have powerful AI tools to do this, but also campaign strategists are looking at response and reaction and engagement and shifting these campaign journey roadmaps, if you will, based upon what we see in real time as these campaigns deliver. So, it used to be that a tremendous amount of user research was done to build a strategy, and then the strategy was deployed. Once the campaign completed, there would be a period of reflection, and then you would iterate into a second cycle. Today, all of that is 360-degree, nonlinear, real-time, algorithmically powered insights that produce better outcomes through learnings that we're able to acquire as these campaigns deliver.
Yeah. And another thing that they won't tell you until you experience it is you also have to meet the audience within the technology platform they're on. And there's some caveats with these platforms. For example, a lot of conversations organically happen on Twitter, but it's very hard to run policy ads on Twitter. Most of the Twitter kind of ecosystem doesn't allow it. We'll see it now with Elon's future of kind of the platform. But again, you have to first identify the audience, what platforms they kind of interact with, and then how do these platforms help you drive towards that policy change or advocacy, right? So again, Facebook is really good at getting a user to do an action, versus a TikTok is so viral where a lot of people spend their time, but they're not necessarily leaving TikTok after they see an advertisement to then go read about it more. So you really have to play this balancing act between what the audience is doing, but then how do these platforms allow these audiences to interact with you as a brand? And that's a key thing, which you need to focus on for the technology.
Thank you. I have a question from our audience. Danny mentioned being careful with how companies manage personal data. Do you have recommendations about how to find good vendors in other countries with different legal systems?
Good question. Yeah, I would say it's very hard, just, working with partners to make sure they are compliant across all the different, laws and regulations within each country. Hearing that they are GDPR compliant is going to be a first step. How they collect data is really important. Where do their servers exist? Do you own that data? Who owns the data? How is it shared? How is it transacted? There's a lot of good questions you could ask these partners, but really finding out and making sure they're compliant across all the laws within the country that your brand or potential government body exists in is super important. But yeah, data collection is a tricky one for public diplomacy, because don't forget, a lot of the funding comes from actual taxpayers, right? So they're the one funding the campaigns and you're collecting the data. It could almost be viewed as surveillance. So especially public diplomacy brands really need to be careful on how they interact, how they collect emails, and really disclose in the terms and conditions and making it very well known to users what their data is going to be used for is really important.
Thank you. Can you just, we have just a couple, 2-3 minutes left. I actually have to do two topics. I would really love to hear your thoughts. One is, what kind of internal capabilities that we need to build in order to at least, do some of this work? And looking at that chart, it's a partnership. You have to partner, with different organizations to this, but internally, we still need to have some basic capability in order to carry out this type of effort. So what would that be? What is the minimum that's required?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if users can see these slides, but this is the process that we execute internally, and there's versions of this process that any organization can execute themselves. It obviously begins with deeply understanding the communication goals, or in the case of the companies that we work with, the business goals. That must be the starting point before you can develop a strategic framework. So, how do you do that? You do that through interaction, collaborative discussion with key stakeholders, so that the people leading the communications efforts can all coalesce around a shared vision of what the specific campaign goals are. That must be the starting point. Now, today, there are degrees of sophistication to which you can deploy different kinds of platforms. Danny mentioned this as well. But a lot of powerful performance platforms today, certainly in these walled garden types of environments, whether it's Google or different Meta properties, do have a lot of self-serve opportunities. And in fact, the majority of campaigns that are generating revenue for companies like Meta and Google are being activated by marketers on their own, and they're built to be very, very easy to use. So in fact, we have our own self-serve platform, and we build it in a way that those without deep technical knowledge and without deep media experience can actually construct and deploy campaigns very successfully, very quickly. So think carefully about availability to powerful self-serve tools and start to use them and train inside them. We've talked a little bit about insights and analytics. We think about this, I hope, and I think in a very sophisticated way, but there are always going to be measurable outcomes that you can extract from any kind of campaign activity, and recognizing that and thinking about that deeply in real time as these campaigns unfold against defined goals is going to enable you to successfully deploy campaigns on your own.
Just a last question. 2 minutes. Last question. in a way is related. One is if you can talk a little bit more about the first party data, what you need to do, right? And also just sort of educate all of us. So what's the first party data that you can do with, and the second party data, and then third party data, just talk about. But ultimately, even for public diplomacy work, we think of it as about really its engagement, it's that content creation. And so I saw, in one of the slides, you look at like the insights of whatever, everything. And at the end, it's like tech-enabled creative work. So if you tell us a little bit more on that, and what's the implications for content creation at the, towards the end of this whole process.
Yeah, I mean, I can kick things off, and Danny will have thoughts as well. So, I think a big idea we wanted to communicate is this transition we're in the middle of from third-party data to first-party data. And literally every client we have is looking at ways to successfully make that transition so that they can acquire first-party data. These are opt-in users that have agreed to be marketed to. Unlike third-party data segments, which historically has been how we've been able to successfully drive performance outcomes, these are aggregated data providers that are intelligently constructing data sets through things like purchase behavior, et cetera. So I would suggest that those in the public diplomacy space are uniquely well positioned to acquire significant amounts of powerful first-party data or first-party audiences that they can market to. Why? Because you are fundamentally differentiated. There isn't an inherent competitive environment. And a lot of users do want to engage with institutions in the public diplomacy space. So I think there's a massive opportunity to build larger first-party data audiences or zero-party data that you can then use to deliver successful communications without having to rely on acquired third-party data.
Yeah, so quick definition on first-party data versus third-party. So third-party data collection happens on the actual browser. So think of Chrome versus Safari. Chrome right now is tracking all of the users and where you browse, going to multiple websites, ESPN, Disney Plus, whatever the case may be, versus first-party data is only data that you collect on your own website. So this is the brand's or company's own data of their own visitors coming to its own website, versus third-party is what Google Chrome is sharing out of this user visited this site, they did this action and that action. So what Google is saying, they're actually going to no longer track those users of just across the board of what sites they're visiting. And so now brands only have the data of people coming to their site, meaning they only know their customer data, but they don't know prospecting audiences. So they don't know audiences that haven't come to their site yet. And this is a big problem because you need a lot of that third-party Google Chrome data to power and reach people that are moms versus students, for example. You don't get that data unless Google Chrome is tracking it. But they've come out and decided to say, you know what, we're no longer going to track users because customers have a problem with this. This is invasive. So right now, brands need to collect and get as many people to their site as possible. They need to create customer lists because all of this data you could reuse and implement in future campaigns. So that doesn't go away. And so that is always to your richest data set, whoever your customer is.
30 seconds of content.
Yeah, I mean, I can kick things off and just say that, Danny's point around the need for entities and organizations to build first-party data can best be achieved through the creation of powerful pieces of content that bring people to your website and enable you to acquire this first-party data. So, we're emerging now from a period where content wasn't a primary part of a communications effort. Today, data and technology and content have kind of converged around this recognition that without powerful content, without powerful stories, it's very difficult to engage with users in a meaningful and perhaps even authentic way. And without doing that, it's going to be very hard to bring users toward your site and build sustainable relationships with those users that can be activated.
Well, Jason and Danny, thank you so much for coming and to share with us your work and all these perspectives. And it's been very educational for myself, and I hope that for our audience as well. Thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to continuing this conversation, and also look forward to seeing you in our future program. Thank you.
Thank you so much.